So I'm working at getting some of these lights working. Not all of my gauge lights are working, and figured I would just make a short little video here of all the little repairs I'm doing, just to show how I'm doing and how I diagnose some stuff. But one thing to look for with these old bulbs here is it's just a single wire, power wire, and they ground out through the dash panel itself. So this light wasn't working here for the one indicator. But before you start just tossing bulbs and figuring they're all burnt out, one thing you really got to check for is how the ground is. So this bulb was actually good. It just had a bad ground. I actually had to take the whole indicator thing off of the panel, scratch it up a little bit, get the ground going good again, and then once these little contacts on the socket make a good ground, they start working again. So that's always something good to look for. Always troubleshoot. Look for the simple stuff first. Isolate it, and before you start just throwing stuff away, make sure it's not something simple. A little wiring issue like this. I've pulled the dash panel down to do it on these 359s. What you got to do is drop the steering column. It's just a single bolt, and then that this hinge is open. Drop the steering wheel down, and then these panels actually drop down pretty nice. You always got to make sure you don't have some wires running through the firewall that are a bit too short. If someone on my other panel there, someone didn't make the wires long enough when they redid some of the wiring, so I'm actually gonna have to cut those wires and lengthen them just so I can get the panels to drop down nicely. But they really did make these old trucks easy to work on, and something I miss in the 389 especially, although you don't really have to go into these panels as often, is just how easily everything comes apart. To look at all your wiring, it looks like a bit of a mess there, but I have wiring diagrams and all the wires are numbered, so it's actually not that hard to make sense of it. Also got something leaking. I noticed I was driving around here, I was starting to get oil on the floor, so I believe my oil pressure gauge, because these are all manual gauges, of course, so there's actually an oil line and air lines and everything running right to the gauges, so I'm pretty sure there's a small leak in this oil line. I'll have to fire it up and get my oil pressure going just to diagnose the leak, but you know, it doesn't hurt to open this up and double check everything. Before you start trying to find gauges for these old trucks, are paying, you know, a couple $100 for a gauge. You know, check the sensors, check the wiring, check the hoses. I noticed my speedometer cable has a oh, there it is. It's broken there. My speedometer's not working, but I'm gonna check the sensor first, and then if that is in fact working normally, then I'll have to replace the cable for the speedometer here, which would be a bit of a chore, but you know, it's one of the, if you want to start restoring these things, it's going to be a lot of these little issues that you're going to have to learn how to track down and repair, so there's a lot of work to do here. Yeah, here's a good example of what many of the problems is, you know, this stuff just gets corroded. So this is the high beam light for the dash. You can see that that's, you know, it's pretty much corroded. They all have these washers here that are kind of designed to dig into the aluminum for the panel. And again, this wasn't working. I'll clean it up, scratch it up. I know the light bulb's good because I shorted it out on the dash, so you know, take all this apart, clean her up good, and you'd be surprised how easy some of these fixes are. If you're wondering how they used to get their colored dash lights back in the day before you could buy colored LEDs, it's a pretty simple thing. They just had these little, basically a balloon over the light bulb of colored plastic. This is out of an old Freightliner that had all green lights. I swapped them out with green LEDs, so now I've got a bunch of spare bulbs. If I was gonna switch to LEDs, I would switch every light in the dash to an LED. But until then, I'm just gonna reuse these old bulbs. They are $18.95, I believe, is the size, and it's a common bulb for back this era. But I would recommend going to LEDs. They're really nice, especially if you want to get color. It's the way to go. But for regular bulbs, these will work fine. It's a good idea to get yourself some good electronic contact cleaner. This stuff can save you a lot of headaches, and you'll think you've got something cleaned out, and then you'll give it a shot with this, and everything will start working again. It's a really good thing to have. One thing to remember: every time you pull down this panel, your idiot lights are not just a single wire with the steel clips, or a dual wire with plastic clips, and once they get old, there's no grip left in them, so you're gonna have to make sure all of your idiot lights are clipped back into their spots, because they'll fall out pretty much every time you open the dash. But I got all my lights, so I had 3 gauges missing, the high-low was missing, this blinker was missing, and it was all a case of just getting those contacts cleaned up again. Takes a bit of work, but then they're good. Next on my list is getting this shock put back. It's wrecked, but when we were loading it, this suspension overextended and it pulled the shock right out of itself, so it's rubbing on the airbag. So until I get a new shock put on, I've got to get this loosened up, so I'll probably have to torch these nuts to get them warmed up, and then they should come right off. But it's pretty much seized on there now, and I don't want to wreck that airbag from it scrubbing there. Well, that didn't go very good, but I got the bottom one off by torching it. Came off quite easy once it was torched and warmed up. But up here, it had a nylon lock nut on, and that melted into the threads there. I was hoping I could get it past the threads before it would start causing a problem, but it started getting tighter and tighter and just snapped her off. So looks like I'll be having to buy a new bracket here, but oh well, that's how she goes sometimes. I've had to climb up and give this clearance light a bit of a tap sometimes to get it going, so I'm just going to clean that all up. You can see here I had a beacon light, and there's the original paint underneath. It was kind of an emerald green, or a bit of a darker green. Thought that was kind of interesting. This cap's in pretty good shape. The worst rust on it, you won't be able to see it, but there's some of it. It's kind of bubbled there. There's nowhere that's actually really rotting through anywhere, even if the paint's missing, but kind of glad I don't have to rip all of this off. I'm gonna have to replace these clearance lights here sometime, but they don't appear to be leaking. It's more just the plastic chrome's getting old and coming off.